Welcome back to The Point. On the night Narendra Modi was sworn in as India's 15th Prime Minister, tonight we're discussing the government that was sworn in just some 2.5 hours ago. We're talking and analysing about its strengths as well as its potential weaknesses. Before I come, Shobna Bhartia, to how powerful the PMO could be or is likely to be under Mr. Modi, let me talk about a couple of inclusions, a couple of allocations of portfolio and a couple of exclusions. First, Smriti Irani. Are you surprised that a complete first-timer in government has got the critical HRD ministry and that too at cabinet rank?
Very surprised, Karan. That does come as a big surprise because it's an extremely important ministry with education, sports, youth all under it. I'm extremely surprised that it's been given to somebody who's got no proven track record. Agreed, she's been very effective on television, but somewhere I think it's actually a reward for her taking on Rahul Gandhi, because one can't find an explanation as to why Smriti Irani, who is neither age-wise senior nor in terms of the number of years she's put into parliament senior to say a Piyush Goyal or to so many others who've been made MOSs. She's been given cabinet rank, she's been given HRD, one of the most important ministries, and she has no proven track record whatsoever. So short of saying that she has been rewarded for taking on Rahul and reducing his margin, I can't see the logic behind actually giving HRD to Smriti Irani. Giving her a ministry, yes, it's quite understandable, but giving her HRD is a bit of a puzzle.
Enram, what about the fact that this government has only one Muslim minister? I know that the BJP have no Muslim MPs of their own, but clearly if Mr. Modi wanted to increase representation of the Muslims, and they are pretty close to 15% of the population, and it's also a section that he needs to reach out to, he could have promoted to ministerial positions people like Muhtar Abbas Naqvi or MJ Akbar. None of that's happened. The only Muslim minister is Najma Heptullah. Are you surprised that there's only one Muslim minister in the government?
No, I'm not surprised because they can't artificially contrive these things. But let's look at Najma Heptullah's choice, a grandniece of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. She jumped ship at the wrong time in 2004. Just as the UPA was going to get into power, she's waited it out for 10 years and she's been rewarded for her patience. And taking off from what Shobana said, I can't resist remarking, Karan, that Arun Jaitley has been rewarded for losing to Amarinder Singh, getting 3 portfolios for now.
Okay, that's a little bit of a jibe, I should add, from you rather than a comment. Anurjit Singh, what about the fact that Arun Shourie, who the press was saying was a front runner for the finance ministry, doesn't feature in this ministry at all? There's now some speculation that he could be deputy chairman of the planning commission, but he's a man who doesn't think very highly of the planning commission, so he may be a very odd choice for that job, if he gets it.
Yeah, no, Karan, I just want to roll back to the HRD minister. I don't know the lady and I don't know what her special skills are. But look at Mr. Kapil Sibal. You had an able, experienced, mature, seasoned person, and he could not carry through the reform program for HRD. So what happened? In the same vein, I asked a question that every minister doesn't have to be a tall body. Every minister doesn't have to be a very experienced or a hotshot of a political figure. So in that sense, coming back to Mr. Jaitley and Mr. Shourie, I think Munjal once said recently on one of your shows that if you combine the political strengths and the experience that is required to pull off many of the transformational programs that are needed in the finance ministry, Mr. Jaitley was obviously a better choice. I don't know about the planning commission. I've also heard rumors that the planning commission may cease to exist.
What about Amit Shah, Mr. Mittal? He is clearly a very, very important person, not just to the BJP, but to Mr. Modi in particular. He's the architect of the victory in UP. But he has no real role in this government as far as we know. There's some speculation that he might possibly get the BJP presidency, but that's not confirmed and it's only speculation. Will he not have a critical role?
Mr. Amit Shah is required to be an asset for the party as well. Karanji, you must appreciate that while there is a government in place, there is also a party which needs to run, because at the cost of the party, if it's just a government, then long term there are very serious implications. I just want to add one comment about Smriti Irani. The lady is absolutely competent. I think she's been on your show, she's been all over. We've all heard how bright she is in her ideas, in her resolve, her understanding of the issues. And such a person would be a sure asset in a ministry like HRD. You know, let's not look at this ministry from the conventional prism of experience. How many times has a person been a member of parliament? All that, this nation is a young nation. Some of the best companies which are being run today are the ones which have been set up by youngsters. So let's not look at governance only from the point of view of I need to be 60 if I have to govern.
I take your point.
She is bright, and believe me, she'll do wonders in HRD.
All right, I take your point. That's a very fair answer. It's a very fair defense. Let's move on to the Naresh Gujral, to Ajit Doval. It's said that he's going to be NSA. The press has accepted it as a fact. But he has absolutely no foreign policy experience. So far, the 3 NSAs we've had, their real forte in strength was foreign policy, and that was one way in which the PMO kept control of foreign policy. Now, by choosing Ajit Doval, is the Prime Minister suggesting that the role of the NSA will be really limited to security? And secondly, is this an indication that Sushma will be her mistress in South Block and the PM won't interfere?
I think Sushma is a very experienced politician, a very senior leader of the BJP. So obviously she will call the shots. And Mr. Doval's role would more be in the internal security. At the same time, the foreign policy, again, the tone and tenor is set by the Prime Minister. And I'm sure the Foreign Minister will take that forward. But the NSA would play a bigger role in the internal security.
But without the NSA having foreign policy experience, and with the Prime Minister having him as his closest advisor, the PMO will lack foreign policy input. So will this PM be able to set the tone and tenor when he doesn't have direct foreign policy advisors immediately around him in his PMO? Isn't that putting the Prime Minister at a disadvantage vis-a-vis his own External Affairs Minister?
No, I don't agree with that at all. You have seen Mr. Modi's style of governance. He gets in experts to advise him, and I'm sure he'll call in experts as and when required. You don't have to have a permanent fixture in the PMO.
I know both of you want to come in on this. First, I'll take Mr. Matsing, then I'll come to you, Shobna. Do you believe that Ajit Doval will need a strong foreign policy advisor in the PMO working directly to him to be able to function as NSA, or can he do it without that foreign policy input?
No, I don't think that's necessary. You know, the NSA's post is actually an extra-constitutional post. The MEA is supposed to give the advice to the Prime Minister. So it's reverting to an earlier pattern where the MEA advises the PM on foreign policy. So when you have a heavyweight minister like Sushma Swaraj, you don't need an NSA who is hiving off important subjects from the MEA.
So the NSA has been diminished by Mr. Modi?
I think so. So that the importance of the MEA is re-established.
You wanted to come in, Shobha?
Karan, I just wanted to come in on one point, that there are very strong talks of Jai Shankar being brought in as advisor to the Prime Minister. So NSA would be there, but the Prime Minister would have his advisor on foreign policy. So if that does happen, then the roles are very clearly demarcated.
Except that Jai Shankar only took up his job in Washington in January, and number two, he's credited with having got us over the Cobra Gade problem. Therefore, he's actually begun very well. If you pluck him out after 6 months, you not only leave Washington weak, but you have removed a man who's actually made a mark within 6 months of his doing so.
But I suppose over here the entire terrain for him is much larger. If he does come in as advisor to the Prime Minister, then the ambit is so much larger.
One of the papers today, it might well have been yours, said that in fact the job of Deputy NSA had been offered to an ambassador in a major Western country and he declined. Is that possibly a suggestion that Jai Shankar has said no?
No, I don't think so. No. I believe that it is likely that he will be coming in.
Mr. Mittal, let me ask you one other quick question before I talk about the nature of the PMO and how powerful it's likely to be. L.K. Advani and Murli Manohar Joshi have no role to play in this government. Have they reached the end of their political road?
You see, we are defining the political roles only in terms of being ministers or being something. You know, BJP is not just a party, it is a movement of an ideology which has now got political authority to implement what it always has felt. So, even if Mr. Advani or Mr. Murli Manohar Joshi are not a part of the government, there's so much which the government will depend on them for advice, for counseling, for जिसको मार्गदर्शन कहना चाहिए हमें. And you know, there is such definitive roles given their experience, given their knowledge, and given their deep understanding of the issues involved.
Bit of a contradiction in what you're saying. On the one hand, you're saying that there are people with great talent, with great experience, with great knowledge. They have no role to play. They're going to not even be advisors because they're not formally advisors. So they've been, in a sense, put out to pasture very gracefully, and yet you believe that this is the right treatment for them. Isn't that a contradiction?
Karanji, I think we are assuming, as I said, that unless there's a formal role, there's no utility.
Okay.
That's not it. That's really not it. In fact, governance is all about a lot of informal consultation, informal advice, informal guidance. It's so much to do with informality from people not directly charged with any responsibility.
All right, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I leave it to the audience to judge whether that's a convincing role that you found for Murli Manohar Joshi and L.K. Advani. I'm pretty sure of one thing, that if they could hear you define their roles, they would grimace. They certainly wouldn't smile, but you may well be right. One other thing, Enram, before I come to that whole question about how powerful the PMO will be, does this nature of cabinet and the way in which portfolios have been handed out and everything that we've discovered about Mr. Modi's from the 16th onwards when he won that election suggest that the Ram Temple, Article 370 and the Uniform Civil Code are not going to play a major role in this government? Because that's been a lurking fear that has existed in some quarters. Has it been more or less now laid to rest?
I should hope so, that it's not at all on the agenda of this BJP-led NDA government for the next 5 years, and nobody will raise it in any menacing way or in any kind of way. I think the Prime Minister would do well to assure the country and its people this as early as possible so that no apprehension remains. But I would certainly hope so. From this I can't say, but I would hope so.
I want to bring you in on that, Naresh Gujral. You're a critical ally of the government, and even though the BJP has a majority on its own and could do whatever it wants without consulting you, nonetheless, I'm pretty sure that they won't want to endanger the alliance. Where does the SAD stand on Article 370, Uniform Civil Code and Ram Temple? I know, for instance, where Chandrababu Naidu stands, but I want to know where you stand.
Karan, it was made very clear even when we had the minimum program last time. So I think that is something which is, there's no need to debate that. As far as the temple issue is concerned, the BJP manifesto itself made it very clear that it can be constructed only if there is, after mutual negotiations, both sides agree, or if there is a court order. So I think there is no point trying to make a mountain out of a molehill when there is no issue there.
All right.
BJP itself has made it clear.
Let's then come, Anurjit Singh, to this question of how powerful the PMO will be. Do you believe that, in fact, this will be the real critical engine of this government and that Mr. Modi will personally supervise all his ministers regardless of who they are and how senior they are, and at the end of the day, the real authority behind the government will be the PMO?
Karan, Mr. Modi comes across as a can-do person. You need will to act, will to decide, to create outcomes. In a complex, diverse country like ours, with such a large political body, you need somebody to coordinate this whole effort. And I believe that that coordination effort is going to be played by a powerful PMO, because without a powerful PMO, Mr. Modi is going to find it very hard to deliver all the promises that have been set afoot and all that this country needs to achieve in very short time for us to make a dent in lost time. So I can't see the success of the new government without a strong PMO.
You know, everyone says that, in fact, this government will have a strong PMO. And one of the most striking things about the way the government began was the initiative to call the SAARC leaders, all of whom, with the exception of Bangladesh, were here. And people believe that that's the first sign that Mr. Modi will want to drive a particular line through foreign policy. But if it's NSA who used to be traditionally his principal foreign policy advisor, has no foreign policy experience, and if he doesn't get a strong advisor in, I mean, I know Shobna Bhartia said that Mr. Jaishankar may come, but it's quite possible Mr. Jaishankar may not come. Doesn't that put Mr. Modi at a disadvantage? Because suddenly the SAARC initiative and other such things that he has planned will have to be entirely handled by the MEA, and the PMO will have no role to play. So suddenly in that one area, the strong PMO won't be as strong.
Well, you know, every Prime Minister creates his own structure. I think if you go back to Mr. Vajpayee's period, he was not a very hands-on Prime Minister, but he was a very effective Prime Minister.
He had Brajesh Mishra.
Yeah. So Vajpayee's success was because of three very strong institutions: the Principal Secretary's Office, the CCS, and the CCEA. These were the three major decision-making institutions in the government. So if you have a strong Prime Minister's office, that's part of the trio. The other two have to be equally strong. But the other two are part political. This one is purely administrative.
But without good foreign policy advice in the PMO, can things like more SAARC initiatives happen?
Well, if he has a separate advisor, fine, he'll get the advice. If not, he's got the Foreign Secretary, whose job actually is to be the principal advisor at the official level. The Foreign Secretary's position is still there.
You've heard Naresh Gujral, Mr. Man Singh putting a lot of stress on the fact that the Foreign Secretary is there. Now, when UPA came to power in 2004, they actually made a point of changing critical bureaucrats. The Cabinet Secretary was changed, the Home Secretary was changed. Those are at least two that I remember. I think the Defence Secretary may have been changed as well. Will Mr. Modi seek to put in place senior bureaucrats of his preference and choice in the critical ministries, or do you think he'd be happy for the tradition of the civil service that they don't serve individual ministers, they serve the government of India, continue, and will the incumbents be allowed to continue as well?
Karan, before I answer this question, I would like to just talk for a minute on the NSA. You will recall Pandit Nehru never had an NSA. Mrs. Gandhi never kept an NSA. It didn't mean that they were not driving the foreign policy. In fact, this institution was created only in the last few years.
By Mr. Vajpayee, by the way.
In a way, I think, yes, I'm saying that. Up until Mr. Vajpayee, there was no NSA. But that doesn't mean that the country didn't have a foreign policy, or that the foreign minister could not function, or that the prime minister could not function. So I don't think this is imperative. As far as your other question is concerned, every prime minister must be allowed, this is his right, to choose the bureaucrats that he is comfortable with, that he feels can deliver the goods, that he feels can advise him, can take the administration forward. So I think there is nothing wrong if a few key bureaucrats are changed.
Do you believe then, Aniljeet Singh, that when it comes to the critical central role that the PMO will play in terms of, to begin with, economic policy, that there will be a constant push from Mr. Modi for far-reaching reform and things that previous governments have been hesitant to tackle? Particularly, I'm talking about labour law reform, which is something the BJP manifesto is committed to, will be tackled, and that Mr. Modi will make sure that is something that happens under PMO guidance?
I think it's a question of the effectiveness of the communication and the trust they have amongst the senior political party, senior leaders within the party. I think we've all agreed on the show that the top 4 or 5 people will work closely together and in unison, and that's what will drive the agenda. And we didn't see that happening in the past 5 years. If you take the case of the Finance Ministry and Mr. Chidambaram or Mr. Kapil Sibal, they tried very hard, they're very able people, but they could not push through their agenda.
Let's look a little further down the road. One of the things that was so obvious today, Ram, was the presence of those SAARC leaders. And as I think your paper in its leader yesterday pointed out, after SAARC leaders, the one whose presence was particularly critical was in fact Mr. Nawaz Sharif. If I recall correctly, your leader suggested that the real possible reason the other SAARC leaders were there was to make it possible for Mr. Sharif to come. Do you think we are seeing the beginning of a new relationship with Pakistan, an attempt by Mr. Modi to reach out and try and forge some solution to the historic problems that have separated the two countries? Or are people reading too much into just one ceremonial event?
Karan, I think it was an excellent initiative, innovative, and we should commend this without the slightest reservation. But this only sets up an opportunity, sets up the opening act, a good atmosphere, and I think we got to follow up on this. My mind goes back to Rajiv Gandhi's decision to go to China and have a top-level summit meeting with Deng Xiaoping when conventional wisdom advised against it, and there has been a follow-up by every government since then. And I think that's one of the things that Rajiv Gandhi, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, will be remembered for in the area of foreign policy. Likewise, this sets up an opportunity, but the rest is up to follow-up and implementation.
Now, in fact, this channel has been informed by extremely authoritative, almost unimpeachable sources that there are 2 or 3 things that Mr. Nawaz Sharif intends to communicate tomorrow when he meets our Prime Minister at that bilateral. One of the things he wants to say is that as far as Pakistan is concerned, 2002 is not an issue, it's over, it's done with, they want to move forward. The second thing, that we need to continue with the back channel. We need to perhaps appoint new people to man it, but the back channel is a good mechanism that needs to be kept alive. And the third thing, apparently, is Mr. Nawaz Sharif wants to indicate that he would like the dialogue to resume, but it doesn't have to be in the composite dialogue structure. A new architecture would be perfectly acceptable to the Pakistanis. How important would those 3 messages, if they're communicated tomorrow, be to Mr. Modi?
Well, 2 of them are important. Let's set aside 2002, that's past. The dialogue requires a new structure because the composite dialogue has reached its utility, the end of its usefulness. It's got a mixed record. Some areas did well, some areas didn't do so well. So I think we should segregate some of the problem areas and leave it to higher political leadership to resolve. That's one. I think that's a good idea. The big question mark is, Mr. Sharif can say what he wants to say. Will the Pakistani army allow him to carry out his policy towards India?
That's a question Mr. Modi has to find an answer to very quickly.
Because when Nawaz Sharif and Manmohan Singh met in New York, the Pakistani army was behind one of the biggest infiltration attempts. And it took 14 days for the Indian army to flush them out. 14 Pakistanis were dead. This time, they mounted an attack in Herat. There have been more violations of the LOC.
I should add very quickly that President Karzai has told this channel that he believes, and he's been told this by Western intelligence agencies, not by his own, that the Herat attack was mounted by LET. Do you think that's a credible thing, or do you think that's just speculation on his part?
I think it's entirely credible, and the LET, as we all know, has links with the Pakistani military establishment.
So this is something Mr. Modi needs to be on guard against.
That's a signal.
Very quickly, Naresh Gujral, I want to put this to you. Many people believe from the way Mr. Modi has begun, not just the SARC initiative, but some of the speeches, the kissing of the floor in Parliament, calling it the temple of democracy, which is to use that evocative Nehruvian phrase, that he is determined to project himself as a statesman and to find ways around the obstacles that his own past has created in the eyes of many. Do you believe that in that same spirit, sometime in the early days of this prime ministership, he would also have a reassuring message for those minorities who are apprehensive? I don't mean just Muslims, but the minorities that are apprehensive of him. Do you think that's another thing that he'll do quickly because he wants to succeed and he's looking not just at 5 years but possibly 10?
Karan, I have absolutely no doubt that he will do so. He has made it amply clear that he wants to carry the whole nation along, irrespective of who the minorities are, whether they're Muslims, whether they're Christians, whether they're Sikhs. And I'm certain that slowly, as this government's agenda unrolls, as the minorities see the action of this government on the ground, they will also feel reassured.
One quick question before I come to the end of the show. We're coming to the end. Tomorrow is Jawaharlal Nehru's 50th death anniversary. Now, Nehru is not someone that Mr. Modi has traditionally, particularly in his campaign speeches, held in high regard. But he is the first Prime Minister, and a 50th death anniversary is a special moment. Would you, as an ally of Mr. Modi, like to see him go tomorrow to Shanti Ghat and pay his respects as the new Prime Minister of India?
I certainly would like to see that. Mr. Nehru was one of our greatest prime ministers. It's a fact that he made huge sacrifices for the independence of this nation, and I hope that Mr. Modi will be magnanimous in victory and definitely go and pay his homage tomorrow.
Sudhanshu Mittal, I'm going to give you the last word. And you really have to give me an answer in 10 seconds. I do not have time for anything longer. Do you believe Mr. Modi will go tomorrow to pay his respects to Jawaharlal Nehru? Yes or no?
I have no personal information. I just want to say one thing.
No, but just answer that question. I don't have time for you to go to another tangent. Do you think he should go? Do you think he should go?
I'm sure, given the importance of the occasion, he should go. I just want to say one thing. Modi ji does not believe in tokenism. We were discussing about the minority. No tokenism. It's an era of doing things rather than just being symbolic about doing things.
But the point I want to note is both Mr. Gujral and you believe he will go and he should go, and many would see that as a very important message, an underlining of the fact that Mr. Modi is putting his own past and his own rhetoric behind him, and as I suggested, showing to the country that he's not just a prime minister, but he's determined to become a statesman. It's not easy to become a statesman, but he's showing all the right talent for doing so. That would give people a lot of assurance. We're going to end this particular episode there. Tomorrow, in a special episode, we're going to spend the whole 1 hour debating India-Pakistan. We'll know by this time tomorrow precisely what happened when Mr. Modi and Mr. Sharif met. We have a star-studded panel from both countries to talk about India-Pakistan relations and the future that lies ahead. That's tomorrow night at the same time. But for me, for tonight, goodbye, good night.